All right, so today we're diving into XRXES monitoring software.
Uh-huh.
And wow, we've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, we do.
We've got marketing materials, installation guides,
Right, yeah.
privacy policy, FAQs, the whole 9 yards.
Yeah. Looks like they gave us pretty much everything.
Yeah, so hopefully by the end of this, we'll have a really good understanding of what XRXES is,
Definitely.
how it works, the implications of using it, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and the legal and ethical considerations, those are important.
Absolutely, can't forget about those.
Uh-huh.
So to kick things off, let's just start with the basics.
Mhm.
What is XRXES? What's the big idea behind this software?
Well, XERXES is basically it's monitoring software for all sorts of devices.
Okay.
Smartphones, tablets, computers.
Pretty much anything you can think of.
Yeah, pretty much.
And looking at their website, they seem to be targeting two main groups, right?
Yeah.
You've got parents who want to keep an eye on their kids under 18,
Right.
and employers who are monitoring company devices.
Yes, those are definitely their main markets.
And they're very clear about, stressing the legal and ethical use of their software.
Yeah, they really emphasize that.
But then you start looking at the features.
Right.
And it's like, wow, this is a lot more than just simple monitoring.
Yeah, it's pretty extensive.
This is like full-on surveillance almost.
You could say that, yeah.
So let's dive into some of these features. What are some of the things that really jumped out at you when you were looking at all this?
Well, one of the things that caught my eye was geofencing.
Okay.
So imagine, like, a parent wants to know when their kid arrives at school
Right.
or when they leave soccer practice or something like that.
Okay.
They can set up these basically like virtual boundaries on a map, and then they get an alert anytime the device crosses that line.
So it's not just like, basic GPS tracking. It's
Right.
like very specific location-based alerts.
Exactly.
Okay, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just location, right? I mean, this thing can actually see what someone's doing on their device.
Oh, absolutely.
Like what they're typing, what they're looking at.
Yeah, we're talking call recording, social media monitoring.
Oh, whoa.
They even have key logging.
Key logging. So that means,
So like every keystroke, it's captured.
so even if I'm like typing in a message or searching for something online,
Uh-huh.
XRXES can see that.
It can. And what's even more
Yeah.
is that it can even capture keystrokes in incognito mode.
So like even if I think I'm browsing privately,
Yeah.
it's still capturing everything.
It is.
That's kind of creepy.
Yes, it is a bit.
And I saw it can retrieve deleted media too, like photos and videos.
Yep, that's right.
So even if you think you've deleted something,
Uh-huh.
XRXES might still have a copy of it.
Exactly.
It's like a digital time machine or something.
It really is, yeah.
Okay, so that's a lot to take in already.
It is.
But we're just scratching the surface here because it's not just about monitoring.
No, it's not.
XRXES actually gives you the ability to control the device remotely.
Yes, that's a big part of it.
So what kind of control are we talking about here?
Well, there's things like app blocking, website blocking.
Okay.
You can even lock the device completely or wipe all the data.
Wow, so like if a parent sees their kid using an app that they've said is off limits,
Yeah,
they can just shut it down remotely.
that's right.
No arguments, no taking the phone away, just boom, gone.
Exactly. And you can even send commands to the device via SMS.
Oh, wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty powerful.
And they have keyword alerts too, right?
Yes, so you can set it up to notify you if certain words or phrases are used.
So like if a parent is worried about cyberbullying or something like that,
Exactly.
they can set an alert for certain words and get notified if those words pop up.
That's right, even in web searches.
Wow, so this is really giving parents or employers a lot of control.
It is, yeah.
And obviously with all this power comes a lot of responsibility.
that.
And we'll definitely get into those ethical considerations a bit later.
I'm sure.
But for now, let's stick with the practical stuff.
Okay.
Like what devices can this actually run on?
Well, XERXES seems to be pretty compatible with most operating systems.
Okay.
Android, iOS, Windows, Mac OS.
And they support a good range of versions too,
Yeah.
right?
Yes, they do.
So you don't need the latest and greatest phone or computer for it to work.
Right. As long as it's relatively recent, you should be good.
And they have like a free trial and different subscription plans, right?
They do, yeah. They have a 7-day free trial
Okay.
and then a few different subscription plans based on the features you want.
And how many devices you want to monitor, I imagine. So
Exactly.
you can kind of try it out before you commit to anything long term.
Exactly.
So let's say someone decides, okay, I want to try this out.
Mm.
How does the installation process work? Is it complicated?
Well, based on the installation guides they provide, it seems pretty straightforward. The main thing is you need physical access to the device.
Right, that makes sense.
You can't just install it remotely without the person knowing.
Which is probably a good thing, honestly.
Yeah, I would say so.
But once it's installed, you can manage everything remotely, right?
That's right.
Through their web-based control panel.
Exactly.
So you don't need to keep physically accessing the device to see what's going on.
Nope, you can do it all from your computer or phone.
Okay, so we've covered the basics.
Yeah.
What it is, what it can do, what devices it runs on, how to install it. But now let's get to the really important stuff.
Right.
Privacy and security. How does XERXES handle all this sensitive data it's collecting?
That's a really good question.
Because we're talking about a lot of data here.
We are, yeah.
Location, messages, browsing history, keystrokes, everything.
It's all there.
So what are they doing to protect this information?
Well, they do have a pretty detailed privacy policy.
Okay.
It covers things like data collection, encryption, third-party disclosures.
And what about access to the data? Like, can anyone at XERXES see this information?
Well, they actually state that even their own support team can't access the monitored data.
So they're saying it's completely locked down, even from their own employees.
That's what they claim, yes.
That's an interesting claim, but it does raise some questions, like who does have access to this information and under what circumstances?
Yeah, that's something we should definitely explore further.
Okay, so before we go down that rabbit hole,
Right.
I want to circle back to something we touched on earlier. The legal and ethical considerations.
Right, those are crucial.
Because XERXES keeps saying this software is for legal and ethical purposes only.
Uh-huh.
But what does that actually mean in practice?
Well, for starters, they're very clear that using XERXES to monitor someone without their knowledge or consent, especially if they're over 18, is illegal.
So even if you have physical access to the device, you can't just install it and start snooping.
Nope. Consent is crucial.
And they also talk about age restrictions, right?
They do, yes.
So if you're using XERXES to monitor a child, there are specific legal guidelines you need to follow.
That's right. You need to be aware of those.
And what about if someone does use the software inappropriately? Are there any consequences?
Well, XERXES states that they will cooperate with law enforcement in cases of misuse.
So there's definitely a risk involved if you're using it outside of its intended and legal purposes.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is a lot to process already, and we're just getting started.
Yeah, we've only just scratched the surface.
I think we need to take a closer look at some of XERXES' specific capabilities because their feature list is seriously packed.
It really is. There's a lot to unpack there.
And some of the details about how those features work are really interesting.
Oh, absolutely. For instance, did you know that? It can actually tell the difference between when the target device is using incognito mode and when it's browsing regularly.
Oh, wow.
And it captures keystrokes in both.
So even if you think you're covering your tracks online, XERXES is still watching.
Pretty much, yeah.
That's a lot of access.
It is.
What about social media monitoring? How deep does that go?
Oh, they're compatible with a ton of apps, like over 35 social media and messaging apps.
Wow.
Everything from, the big ones like Facebook and Instagram,
right,
down to like some really niche platforms.
And it's not just capturing messages, right?
No, it goes way beyond that.
Like what else can it do?
It logs shared photos and videos.
Okay.
And in some cases, it can even record voice and video calls.
Seriously?
Yeah.
So even if you're like having a private conversation on one of these apps, XERXES could be recording it.
Potentially, yes.
And we talked about this earlier, but it can retrieve deleted messages too.
That's right.
So even if you delete something thinking it's gone, XERXES might still have a copy.
Exactly.
So much for privacy, huh?
It really makes you think about, what privacy even means in the digital age.
Yeah, because it's one thing to see what someone's posting publicly, but to have access to their private conversations, even the ones they thought they deleted, that's a whole other level.
It is. It definitely blurs the lines.
Yeah, because on the one hand, I can see how a parent might be thinking.
Right.
I need to know what my kid is doing online. I need to keep them safe.
Especially with all the dangers out there, like cyberbullying, online predators.
All that stuff.
But at the same time, kids deserve their privacy too.
Exactly.
And they need to be able to develop their own identity and make their own mistakes.
Without feeling like they're constantly being watched.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance.
Yeah, it's like a tightrope walk.
It really is.
Trying to find that balance between safety and privacy.
And I think transparency is really important here too.
Okay, how so?
If a parent is using this kind of software, they need to be open and honest with their child about it.
So not just installing it secretly and hoping they never find out.
Right, because that can really damage the trust between the parent and the child.
And it's not just about monitoring either, right? XERXES also has those remote control features we talked about earlier.
Yes, the ability to not just see what's happening, but actually take control of the device.
So things like app blocking and website blocking. I can see how that could be useful, like if a parent is worried about their kid accessing age-inappropriate content.
Right.
But it could also be used in a more, restrictive way.
Oh, definitely.
Like, could a parent use these features to prevent their kid from accessing information about certain topics?
They could, yeah, and that's a real concern.
Because even if the intention is to protect, it could end up being censorship.
Exactly.
And that's a slippery slope.
It really is, because where do you draw the line?
Right. It's a tough one.
It is, and I think it's important to remember that technology is just a tool.
Okay.
It's how we use it, and the intentions behind that use that really matters.
And it's not just blocking either, right? You can actually lock the device or wipe all the data remotely.
You can, yes, those features are usually marketed as like safety measures.
Okay.
In case the device is lost or stolen.
Right.
But they could also be misused, of course.
Oh, yeah. I can imagine a parent getting into an argument with their teenager and then just locking their phone remotely as punishment.
It could definitely happen.
And wiping all the data, that's a big deal, too.
It is, especially if they haven't backed up their information.
It's not just photos and videos, it's everything.
Contacts, notes, schoolwork, even access to important accounts.
Right, so the impact could be huge.
It could, yeah.
So we've got this software that can see where you are, what you're typing, who you're talking to, what you're looking at online, what apps you're using, and it can block apps, websites, even take control of the device itself.
Right.
Is there anything XERXES can't do?
Well, one limitation is that it does require physical access to the device for the initial installation.
Right, so you can't just install it remotely without the person knowing.
Exactly.
Okay, that's at least some comfort.
It is, yeah.
But once it's installed, everything else happens remotely.
That's right.
Through that web-based control panel.
Exactly.
And they say that control panel is pretty user-friendly.
Oh, okay.
And all the data is neatly organized. You can generate reports, all that stuff.
So it's not just a fire hose of raw data?
No. It's presented in a way that's easy to understand.
Which makes sense, because with all this information, you need some way to make sense of it all.
Exactly.
And they offer 247 customer support too, right?
They do, yeah, in case you need help with anything.
So they've definitely thought this through.
It seems that way, yes.
Okay, so I think we've covered the basics of what XERXES is, what it can do, and how it works. But I'm still thinking about all the ethical implications.
Right.
It's such a powerful tool, and it feels like there's so much potential for misuse.
It's understandable to feel that way.
And I think it's important to remember that the legality and ethics of using software like this, they aren't set in stone. They vary depending on where you are in the world. Exactly, in the specific circumstances.
So just because XERXES offers a certain feature doesn't mean it's legal to use everywhere.
Exactly. The laws around surveillance and privacy are different everywhere.
And even if something is technically legal, doesn't necessarily make it ethical.
That's a really important point.
Okay, so how can someone find out what the laws are in their specific location?
I would recommend talking to a lawyer who specializes in privacy and technology law.
Okay, so get some professional advice.
Exactly. They can give you specific guidance based on your situation.
Okay, so legal stuff aside, let's talk about the ethical side of things.
Okay.
What are some of the key things people should be thinking about if they're considering using monitoring software like XERXES?
Well, like we've already discussed, consent is absolutely crucial.
Right. If you're monitoring someone without their knowledge or permission, you're violating their trust, and you might even be breaking the law.
Exactly. And that goes for kids, too, even if they're under 18.
Okay, so even with your own kids, you need to be upfront about it.
Yes. It's important to have an open and honest conversation with them.
Explain why you're doing it, what you're monitoring, how you'll use the information.
Exactly. It's not about controlling them. It's about keeping them safe.
But also giving them some space to grow and make their own choices.
Right. It's about finding that balance again.
Yeah, balance seems to be the key word here.
It really is.
So consent, open communication, those are big ones. What else should people be thinking about?
I think it's important to be realistic about the risks your child or employee actually faces online.
So not just jumping to the most extreme solution.
Right, because with a tool as powerful as XERXES, it's easy to get carried away.
You start thinking, well, I can monitor everything, so why not?
Exactly, but it's really about being strategic and focusing on the specific concerns you have.
So if you're mainly worried about cyberbullying,
Yeah.
maybe you don't need to be monitoring every single website they visit.
Exactly, and it's good to regularly review your monitoring practices and adjust them as needed.
Okay, so don't just set it and forget it.
Right, because what might be appropriate for a 12-year-old might not be appropriate for a 16-year-old.
Right, because they're growing and changing.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the ethics from the perspective of the person doing the monitoring.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the person being monitored? What are their rights?
That's a really important question, and one that often gets overlooked.
Because in today's world, it can be hard to even know if you're being monitored.
It can, especially with software like XERXES, which is designed to be hidden.
So you could be under surveillance and have no clue.
Exactly. It's a bit scary when you think about it.
It is. So what can people do to protect themselves?
Well, awareness is key.
Okay, so just knowing that this kind of software exists.
Yeah, and knowing the signs to look out for.
Like what kind of signs?
Well, keep an eye on your battery life and data usage.
Okay.
Monitoring apps can use up a lot of resources.
So if your battery's suddenly draining faster than usual,
Yeah.
or you're using way more data than normal.
That could be a red flag.
Okay, what else?
Pay attention to how your apps are behaving.
So if they're crashing a lot or running slowly,
Yeah, or just acting weird in general.
it could be a sign of monitoring software interfering.
It could be, yes.
So it's not just about looking for a specific app icon.
Right, because XRXES can hide itself pretty well.
So it's more about noticing subtle changes in how your device is working.
Exactly.
Okay, so battery drain, data usage, app behavior, anything else.
Be careful about clicking on links or downloading apps from sources you don't trust.
Okay, that's good advice in general,
It is, yeah.
but especially in this context.
Right, because some monitoring apps can be disguised as harmless apps.
So you think you're downloading a game,
Yeah.
and it turns out to be spyware.
Exactly.
And if you're really concerned,
Uh-huh.
you can use security software to help protect yourself.
There are a lot of good options out there.
So there are ways to fight back.
There are, but it's a constant battle.
Yeah, because technology is always changing.
It is. New monitoring tools are being developed all the time.
So you got to stay informed and keep updating your security practices.
Exactly.
All right, so to sum up this part of our deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
XRXES is incredibly powerful monitoring software.
It is.
It can be useful for parents and employers,
Yeah. In the right circumstances?
but it also has the potential to be misused.
Absolutely.
And it raises a lot of ethical questions.
It does. It's a double-edged sword.
And as individuals, we need to be aware of the risks
Uh-huh.
and take steps to protect ourselves.
And have open and honest conversations about the use of this technology.
Yeah, communication is key.
It really is.
So we've talked about the features, the implications, the ethical considerations.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's time to think about what this all means for you. What are your thoughts on the balance between safety, privacy, and trust in the digital age?
That's the big question, isn't it?
You know, it's kind of scary to think that all this stuff is going on behind the scenes.
Yeah.
We choose to share certain things online,
Right.
but having information collected without our knowledge or consent, that's a whole different ballgame.
That's true. And,
Yeah.
it all comes back to digital literacy
Okay.
and online safety.
Uh-huh.
Part of that is understanding the tools
Right.
and the technologies that are out there.
That can be used to monitor us.
Exactly.
So let's talk about protection.
Okay.
What can people do to protect themselves from?
Yeah.
Especially software like XERXES that's designed to be invisible.
Well, one thing that we haven't really touched on yet is keeping your devices up to date.
Ah, okay.
You know those software updates that we all get?
Oh, yeah. They're the ones I always ignore.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
those often include security patches that can actually address vulnerabilities that monitoring apps might exploit.
So they're actually important in this context.
They can be, yeah.
All right, good to know.
Yeah, and another thing is to be really mindful
Right.
of the permissions that you grant to apps.
Ah, yeah. When you're installing an app
Uh-huh.
and it asks for access to, like,
Your contacts, your location,
everything's your microphone, yeah.
Sometimes it's like, why does this flashlight app need to know where I am?
Exactly. If an app is asking for access to data or functionality,
Yeah.
that seems excessive.
Right.
That's a red flag.
That's a good point.
Question why it needs those permissions.
Uh-huh.
And remember, you can always deny permissions.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Or just uninstall the app if you're not comfortable.
Yeah, if it's asking for too much, just get rid of it.
Exactly.
So what if someone thinks they're already being monitored?
Okay, well,
Like, is there any way to know for sure?
there are some technical steps you can take.
Okay.
Like checking for unfamiliar processes running in the background.
Okay, so if I see something running that I don't recognize, that could be a sign?
It could be, yeah. And you can also scan your device with anti-spyware software.
Okay, so those are things people can do.
Yeah.
Both proactively and reactively.
Right, but it really is a bit of an arms race.
Yeah, it feels like it.
With new monitoring tools coming out all the time.
It's hard to keep up.
It is, but that's why it's so important to stay informed and be proactive about your privacy.
Okay, so big takeaway. What would you say is the most important thing?
For listeners to remember about XERXES and monitoring and all that, I think it really comes down to knowledge is power.
Okay.
You know, understanding how these tools work,
right,
how they can be misused, and the steps you can take to protect yourself.
Those are all really important.
They are, because it's all about finding that balance between the benefits of technology and protecting our privacy and our autonomy.
It's a tough balance to strike.
It is, but it's a conversation we need to be having.
Absolutely. And it's not about being scared or paranoid.
No.
It's about being informed.
And making choices that align with our values.
Exactly.
That's a great way to put it.
And being active participants, you know, in shaping the future of technology.
Not just passive recipients.
Exactly.
Okay, well, I think that about wraps it up for this deep dive into XERXES monitoring software.
I think so, yeah.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But hopefully you've learned something new.
And that you'll keep thinking about these issues.
Absolutely, because this is a conversation that's not going away anytime soon.
It's not. It's only going to become more important.
So thanks for joining us, and keep those questions coming.
And stay safe out there in the digital world.